You ever get that strange feeling right before buying something? Like everything should make sense. The price, the product, the decision, but it doesn't? You're standing there, maybe scrolling, maybe holding the item in your hand, and something in your mind quietly says, "Wait, this doesn't feel right." And then almost immediately, another voice jumps in. "Stop overthinking it, just buy it." So you do, and later, you regret it. Not always because you couldn't afford it, but because deep down it didn't feel worth it. Hi, my name is Bryony, and I spend way much time thinking about why people who look financially reckless are sometimes better prepared for disaster than people who did everything right. If you've ever felt vaguely unsettled about how dependent your entire financial life is on one company, subscribe and hit most people think that feeling means something is wrong with them, that they're bad with money, indecisive, too emotional, not disciplined enough. But what if that's completely backwards? What if that uncomfortable hesitation is actually the smartest part of your brain trying to protect you? Because here's what almost nobody tells you. We are living in a time where the relationship between price and value has quietly broken, and most people are still making decisions based on rules that no longer apply. For decades, your brain learned simple patterns. Higher price equals better quality. Lower price equals better deal. Popular product equals trusted product. Those shortcuts worked. They helped you make fast decisions without overthinking everything. But today, those patterns are being manipulated. Companies have figured out how to raise prices without improving quality, lower quality without lowering expectations, create demand without creating real value. And they do it so subtly that instead of questioning the product, you question yourself. That moment of hesitation you feel, that's not confusion, that's detection. Your brain is incredibly good at recognizing patterns. Even when you can't explain it logically, it notices when something doesn't match your expectations, when something feels overpriced, when something feels lower quality than it should be, when something feels off. But instead of trusting that instinct, most people override it because we've been trained to believe, if I don't understand it, I must be wrong. And that's exactly where the problem begins. Because once you stop trusting your own sense of value, you become extremely easy to influence. Think about it. If someone else can define what's worth it for you, they control your spending. And in today's world, that's exactly what's happening. This isn't about blaming companies. This is about understanding the environment you're making decisions in. Because once you see it clearly, everything changes. You stop buying things just because they feel right in the moment. You start questioning why they feel that way. You start noticing patterns. You start seeing through the illusion. And most importantly, you start keeping more of your money. In this video, we're going to break down something most people are only starting to notice. There are entire categories of products and services that no longer deliver the value they used to, but people keep buying them anyway. Not because they're careless, not because they're irresponsible, but because their mental model of value hasn't caught up yet. We're going to go through 10 of the biggest examples, and as we do, you'll probably have moments where you think, wait, I've felt that before. That explains so much. That's exactly why I stopped enjoying that. And that's the point. This isn't about making you feel guilty for past decisions. It's about helping you understand them. Because once you understand why something no longer feels worth it, you stop falling for it. And once you stop falling for it, you gain something most people never do: control. Not just over your money, but over your decisions. So before we dive in, I want you to do one simple thing. Think about the last time you bought something and immediately felt unsure about it. Not regret, not panic, just that quiet feeling of, I don't know if this was worth it. Hold on to that feeling, because by the end, you'll understand exactly why it happened.
Let's get one thing clear right away. Your brain is not bad at making decisions. In fact, it's incredibly efficient. The problem is, it was optimized for a completely different world. Long before online shopping, subscriptions, flash sales, and influencer marketing, your brain developed shortcuts to make decisions quickly, because thinking deeply about every single choice would be exhausting. So instead, it built mental rules. Simple patterns like, if it's expensive, it must be better. If everyone has it, it must be good. If it's cheaper, I'm saving money. These weren't stupid assumptions. They were actually very useful. For most of modern history, they worked. Higher price usually did mean better materials, better craftsmanship, longer lifespan. Lower price usually meant compromise, but at least it was predictable. And popular products were often popular for a reason. Your brain learned these patterns through repetition, over years, even decades. But here's where things start to break. The environment changed, but your brain didn't update fast enough. Today, companies understand those mental shortcuts better than ever, and instead of working with them, they design strategies to work around them, or even exploit them. So now, you're using a decision-making system built for a world where price reflected quality, brands built trust slowly, products improved over time, but you're applying it in a world where price can be completely disconnected from quality, brands can manufacture trust overnight, products are optimized for perception, not durability. That mismatch? That's what creates the discomfort you feel. Your brain is a pattern detector. At its core, your brain is constantly asking one question: does this match what I expect? When something fits your expectations, you feel comfortable. When it doesn't, you feel tension. That tension is important. It's your brain saying, something here needs more attention. But modern marketing has created a strange situation where everything looks like it fits the pattern, but doesn't actually deliver the same reality. For example, a high price still looks like high quality, a clean, minimal brand still looks trustworthy, a viral product still feels valuable, but when you actually use the product, it doesn't match the expectation. That creates a psychological gap, and your brain doesn't like gaps. So what does it do? It tries to resolve the conflict, and most of the time, it resolves it by blaming you. You start thinking, maybe I expected too much. Maybe I don't understand this product. Maybe this is just how things are now. Instead of thinking, this might not actually be worth the price. And that shift is subtle but powerful, because once you stop questioning the product, you stop protecting your money. The rise of perception-based value. In the past, value was mostly tied to function. Does it work? Does it last? Is it made well? Now, value is increasingly tied to perception, how it looks, how it feels, what it signals about you. This is why two products can be nearly identical, yet priced completely differently, because one of them is selling more than just the product, it's selling identity, and your brain is very sensitive to that. You're not just buying a jacket, you're buying how that jacket makes you feel, how it positions you, how it fits into your idea of yourself. That's not irrational, that's human, but it also makes you vulnerable, because perception can be engineered. The speed problem. Another reason your brain is struggling: the pace of change. In the past, trends moved slowly. Products stayed relevant for years. You had time to evaluate what was actually worth it. Now, everything moves fast. New trends every week, new products every day, new must-haves constantly. Your brain doesn't have enough time to properly evaluate anything, so it relies even more on shortcuts. And that's exactly what modern systems are designed for: quick decisions, impulse buys, minimal reflection. Because the faster you decide, the less likely you are to question. The illusion of choice. It might feel like you have more options than ever, and technically you do. But more options don't always lead to better decisions. In fact, they often do the opposite. When your brain is overloaded with choices, it looks for ways to simplify. It starts relying on price, brand recognition, popularity, which, as we've already seen, are no longer reliable signals. So instead of making better choices, you end up making faster, less accurate ones. Emotional override. Here's something important. Most spending decisions are not logical. They're emotional first and justified later. You feel something: excitement, curiosity, urgency, fear of missing out. And then your brain creates a logical story to support the decision. That's actually a good deal. I've been needing this. It'll improve my life. but the decision was already made. Modern marketing is extremely good at triggering those emotions because emotion bypasses analysis, and once emotion takes over, value becomes secondary. Why you feel drained after spending. Have you ever bought something and instead of feeling satisfied, you felt tired? That's not random. It's a result of decision fatigue and cognitive friction. Your brain had to process conflicting signals, override doubt, justify the purchase. That takes energy, and when the product doesn't fully deliver, that energy feels wasted, which leads to frustration, not just with the purchase, but with yourself. But here's the truth. You're not failing at spending. You're navigating a system that has become more complex, more manipulative, more psychologically demanding, and your brain is doing its best to keep up. That hesitation you feel, that second guessing, that subtle discomfort, it's not weakness, it's awareness trying to break through noise. And once you start listening to it, everything begins to shift. Because instead of asking, should I buy this? You start asking, why do I feel like I should buy this? And that question changes everything. What this means moving forward. As we go into the next sections, you're going to notice something. Each example isn't just about the product itself, it's about the pattern behind it. A way pricing has changed, a way perception is being used, a way your brain is being nudged. And once you see the pattern, you don't just avoid one bad purchase, you avoid dozens. So now that you understand what's happening internally, let's look at where it's happening externally.
Let's start with something that used to feel like a guaranteed win. Something people still believe is a smart financial move, even when it no longer works the same way. Thrifting, secondhand shopping. For a long time, this was one of the best-kept financial secrets. If you were trying to save money but still wanted quality, this was the move. You could walk into a thrift store with a small budget and walk out with items that were better made, longer lasting, and often from higher-end brands. Why? Because you were buying from a different era, an era where products were built differently, where clothing used better materials, where durability actually mattered. So even though the items were used, they still held value. That's what made thrifting powerful. It wasn't just cheap, it was high value for low cost. But here's the part most people haven't fully processed yet. That equation has changed. What happened? Thrifting didn't decline overnight. It shifted gradually. First, it became popular. Then it became trendy. Then it became content. Suddenly, millions of people were doing it, posting about it, competing for the same items. And when more people want the same limited supply, prices go up. That's simple. But something else was happening at the same time, something less obvious. The quality of what's being donated started going down. Think about it. What are people buying today? A lot of modern clothing is mass-produced, lower durability, synthetic heavy, designed for short-term use, and eventually, that's what ends up in thrift stores. So now you have two things happening at once: higher demand, lower quality supply, and that combination changes everything. Why it feels off now. This is where your brain steps in. You walk into a thrift store expecting low prices, hidden gems, unexpected value. But instead, you see higher prices, inconsistent quality, items that don't feel worth it. And your brain goes, wait, something's wrong here. But because thrifting has always been labeled as smart, you hesitate to question it. You start thinking, maybe I just didn't look hard enough. Maybe I don't understand what's valuable. Maybe this is still a good deal, even when it doesn't feel like one. That internal conflict, that's the gap between old expectations and new reality. The hidden cost nobody talks about. There's another factor most people ignore: time. Finding good items in thrift stores now takes effort. You have to search, dig, sort through racks, visit multiple locations. That time has value. If you spend 2 to 3 hours trying to find a deal, is it still a deal? Sometimes yes, but sometimes you could have spent slightly more and saved hours of effort. That trade-off matters, because value isn't just about money, it's about time, energy, and outcome.
when thrifting still works. Now, this doesn't mean thrifting is useless, far from it. It just means it's no longer automatic. The people who still win at thrifting know what to look for, understand materials, recognize real quality, and are willing to walk away. They treat it like a skill, not a guarantee, and that's the key shift. The real lesson here. This isn't just about thrift stores, it's about something bigger. The idea that cheap equals smart no longer holds up on its own. Because cheap without quality is just waste, and your brain is starting to recognize that. That hesitation you feel when something is low priced but doesn't seem worth it, that's growth. It means you're no longer just reacting to price, you're evaluating value, and that's a completely different skill. What most people miss. A lot of people respond to this shift in one of two ways. They either keep buying cheap things and feel disappointed, or swing in the opposite direction and overspend on expensive items. But the real move is neither. The real move is learning how to separate price from value. Because once you do that, you're no longer controlled by labels like cheap, luxury, deal, premium. You start making decisions based on durability, usefulness, frequency of use, long-term satisfaction, and that's when your spending starts to change. A simple reframe. Next time you're about to buy something, especially something that seems like a deal, pause for a second and ask, if this cost twice as much, would I still want it? If the answer is no, there's a good chance you're reacting to price, not value. And that's exactly the trap most people fall into. Why this matters before we move on. Because the next category flips this idea completely. We just talked about something that used to be cheap and valuable, and is now often neither. Next, we're going to talk about something that used to justify high prices, but increasingly doesn't. And once you see it, you'll never look at expensive products the same way again.
Now let's flip the equation. We just talked about something that used to be cheap and high value, and isn't as reliable anymore. This time, we're going to the opposite extreme. Expensive products, luxury items, premium brands. Because for a long time, there was a very simple rule. If it's expensive, it must be better. And honestly, that rule made sense. Luxury used to represent something real. Better materials, better craftsmanship, more attention to detail. You weren't just paying for a name, you were paying for something that actually lasted longer and performed better. So your brain learned high price equals high quality. And that shortcut became deeply ingrained. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That relationship has weakened. What changed? Luxury didn't lose its image, it lost its consistency. Today, many premium brands still look the same. Same branding, same stores, same storytelling. But behind the scenes, a lot has shifted. Production has scaled. Costs have been optimized. Materials have changed. And in many cases, the focus moved from craftsmanship to perception. Because perception scales faster than quality. You can't easily mass-produce true craftsmanship, but you can mass-produce branding. Why your brain feels confused. Here's where it gets interesting. When you see a high price, your brain automatically activates a certain expectation. You expect weight, durability, precision, longevity. But when the product doesn't fully deliver that experience, something feels off. Not enough to always reject it, but enough to create doubt. And that doubt is uncomfortable. So instead of questioning the product, you question your judgment. You think, maybe I just don't get it. Maybe this is how it's supposed to be. Maybe I'm being too critical. But what if you're not? What if your brain is correctly identifying a mismatch? The power of branding over reality. Luxury today operates heavily on signal value, meaning what the product says about you can matter more than what the product actually does. And again, this isn't irrational. Humans have always used objects as signals. But now, that signaling is amplified. A product doesn't just serve a function, it represents status, taste, identity, belonging. And those things are hard to measure, which makes them easy to price however companies want. Why price is no longer a reliable signal. There was a time when price acted as a filter. Only brands that truly delivered quality could sustain high prices. But now, marketing can do that job.
If a brand can create enough demand, enough desire, enough perceived value, it can charge premium prices even if the underlying product doesn't fully justify it. And because your brain is wired to trust price as a signal, you go along with it, at least at first. The experience gap. This is where people start noticing something strange. They buy something expensive, expect it to feel exceptional, but the experience feels average. Not terrible, just not aligned with the price. That gap between expectation and reality, that's where dissatisfaction lives. And it's becoming more common. Why people keep buying anyway? If this is happening, why doesn't everyone just stop? Because of something subtle. Once you pay a high price, your brain wants to justify it. You don't want to feel like you made a bad decision, so you focus on the positives, ignore the flaws, convince yourself it was worth it. This isn't weakness, it's how the brain protects itself from regret. But it also keeps the cycle going. The shift you need to make. So, what do you do with this? Do you stop buying expensive things completely? No. The goal isn't to avoid high prices, it's to stop assuming that high price guarantees high value. Those are two different things. Instead of asking, is this expensive? Start asking, what am I actually getting for this price? Break it down. How long will it last? How often will I use it? Does it perform better than alternatives? Would I still want it without the brand name? These questions bring you back to reality. A simple test. Here's a powerful mental shift. Imagine removing the logo. Same product, same materials, same design, but no branding. Would you still pay the same price? If the answer is no, then a large part of what you're paying for is perception. And that's fine, as long as you're aware of it. Why this matters? Because this isn't just about luxury items, it's about retraining how you interpret signals. Price used to be a shortcut for value. Now it's just one piece of the puzzle. And if you rely on it too heavily, you'll overpay more often than you realize. The bigger pattern. Notice what's happening so far. Something that used to be cheap and valuable lost its value. Something that used to be expensive and reliable lost its consistency. Both ends of the spectrum have shifted, which means you can't rely on old assumptions anymore. You need a new way of thinking. And the next category makes this even more obvious, because now we're entering a space where the affordable option is no longer actually affordable.
Now we move into one of the most deceptive shifts of all, because this one doesn't look like a problem. In fact, it looks like you're doing the right thing. You're choosing the cheaper option, being responsible, saving money. But what if that choice is no longer actually saving you anything? The idea of budget. For a long time, products were clearly divided into tiers: budget, mid-range, premium. Each tier had a clear purpose. Budget products were more affordable, more accessible, slightly lower in quality. But that trade-off made sense. You saved money up front, and you knew what you were getting. Your brain understood this system perfectly. So when you saw a lower-priced option, you didn't overthink it. You just thought, this is the smarter financial decision. But that system is breaking. Today, something subtle has happened. Budget products haven't stayed in their lane. They've slowly moved up in price. At the same time, premium products haven't increased at the same rate in every category. So now you end up in situations where the cheap option is only slightly cheaper than the better option, and that changes the entire decision. Why this is so confusing? Your brain still categorizes products the old way, so when you see something labeled or perceived as budget, you assume you're saving a meaningful amount of money. But when the price difference is small, that assumption becomes inaccurate. Now you're not choosing between cheap versus expensive, you're choosing between slightly cheaper versus slightly better, and that requires a completely different type of thinking. The hidden loss. Here's where people lose money without realizing it. They choose the cheaper option out of habit, but end up with lower performance, shorter lifespan, less satisfaction. So what happens? They replace it sooner, upgrade later, or feel the need to compensate for the lower quality. And over time, they spend more than if they had just chosen the better option up front. Why your brain misses this? Because your brain focuses on immediate cost, not long-term value. It sees I saved money right now, but it doesn't automatically calculate how much will this cost me over time. That requires conscious effort, and most people don't pause long enough to do it. The illusion of being smart. This is the part that makes it tricky. Choosing the cheaper option feels responsible, so even if the outcome isn't great, you still feel like you made the right decision, and that reinforces the behavior. But smart spending isn't about paying less, it's about getting more value for what you pay. Those are not the same thing. A real shift in strategy. So how do you adapt? You stop asking what's the cheapest option and start asking what's the best value in this price range. That might still be the cheapest option, but sometimes it won't be. And that's okay. The 80% rule. Here's a simple way to think about it. If spending 10 to 20% more gets you 50 to 100% more value, that's not overspending, that's optimization. But if you only focus on minimizing cost, you'll miss those opportunities. Why this happens across so many categories? This isn't limited to one type of product. You'll see it everywhere. Clothing, electronics, beauty products, household items. The pricing tiers have compressed, which means the gap between cheap and good is smaller than it used to be. But your brain is still operating like that gap is large, and that mismatch leads to poor decisions. The mental upgrade you need. From now on, whenever you're about to choose the cheaper option, pause and ask, what am I giving up for this lower price? If the answer is not much, then it's a good deal. But if the answer is quality, durability, experience, then it might not be saving you anything at all. Why this matters before the next section? Because up until now, we've been talking about products, but the next shift, it's about behavior. Specifically, a habit that millions of people still follow, even though the entire logic behind it has changed, and it's quietly draining money every single week.